Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about Autechre and their new album, Sign. Okay, obviously I do not have to introduce Sean Booth and Rob Brown on this channel. I just spent nearly the entire first half of this year reviewing every single one of their albums and covering them in great detail. Link to the playlist with all my previous videos on these guys in the description as per usual. For those new to the channel, I will admit that Autechre are not one of my favorite bands of all time. Their catalog ranges very heavily from a personal enjoyment perspective, and only a few of them do I properly consider great. 6 of them to be exact, being Incunabula, Try Repeat, Untilted, Quaristis, Xi, and sch 1 through 5. All those got scored in the 8 range for me. But even at my lowest point of enjoyment of these guys, they have never once been outright boring. Maybe like Goofy, but that's about it, and it's arguable whether that counts. Back when I actually reviewed sch 1 through 5 when it came out in 2016, I said things like, oh, these guys often don't include melodies and have no emotion involved in their music whatsoever. And I definitely no longer feel that way now that I've done a much deeper dive into their catalog. There have still been projects of theirs where the insane level of experimentation would end up being more difficult for me to connect with. See stuff like Confield or Giraffe 7.30. Not as hot on those projects as most people are. But even these I had such a high level of respect for their construction and their creativity and whatever else. And they did have isolated moments that really stuck with me. Now, the past couple of years have seen Autechre just scaling their projects upwards and upwards to the most ridiculous degree you've ever seen. It started innocently with like a 2-hour double album in Xi, then LSEC was 4 hours spread out over 5 volumes, and of course that culminated gloriously in 2018 with NTS Sessions 1 through 4, which added up to exactly 8 hours. Shockingly, I did not think that the latter project justified its absolutely crushing running time, and that length has been consistently used as a punchline on this channel ever since. Almost made me feel like I can never complain about an album being long ever again. But even so, I did not come out of that project feeling like my time was wasted or like I didn't still get quite a bit of solid material out of it. And I still get bugged by people who think the length of that project was not an issue for them at all, who listen to the project very regularly, and a few even consider among their favorite albums ever created in history. And even though I do not remotely agree with the take on its digestibility, I do at least feel like I get it and can understand how people ended up feeling that way. It really says something that I came out of it not entirely annoyed by the length and coming out at least partially satisfied, even as someone who doesn't consider himself to be a giant fan of these guys. Still, at the end of it all, I was wishing more than anything that these guys would please, for the love of God, release an album that was a normal length. Like, congratulations, you pulled off an 8-hour album and got it to still feel like an album. I feel like you have now hit a brick wall into these experiments of how long we can go. Any attempts to go further and I'm just not even gonna bother. And it seemed like my prayers were finally answered when this new Sign project was announced. Only a little over 1 hour in length. Thank freaking God. I can actually put forward time to digest this one. And the album cover was their most normal looking in a while. No more weird blobby geometric black and white designs. We instead got something that looks like my Orbital New France t-shirt over there. I mean, I sure as hell wasn't about to expect Autechre to make an album that sounded like Orbital. That would never happen in a million years. But it still definitely had me hyped. Then a few weeks ago, they did a one-off live stream of the album for fans to listen to, which I missed since I didn't realize what happened and I was busy working on other stuff. But the reviews came in pretty quickly, with lots of fans excitedly spoiling me to the new direction they were going on. Apparently, this project was going to be Autechre making another melodic ambient type record in a similar vein to Oversteps, and even more low-key and stripped back than that one, supposedly much easier to digest than anything they'd done in decades. I was like, wow, are they really taking this return to the normal people world seriously? I was definitely excited to see what a project like this would sound like. So when it finally dropped the other day, I sat with it, listened to it 4 times that day, and I've kept sitting with it. Not gonna let it take on these guys feel underdeveloped. And can I just say, be glad I did not review this based off of my initial thoughts on the day it dropped. because first 4 listens of this thing, I was ready to call this project their overall weakest yet. A massive letdown across the board, and was gonna score it in like the lower 5 range. First listen the following day, it ended up clicking with me notably more, and after a few days of letting it sink in and my enjoyment fluctuating up and down quite a bit, I think I'll settle for saying that it's decent. It's decent. It's a fine project. But yeah, this was a really weird one to parse. I mean, Autechre's return to normal people music has been very much a mixed blessing that I've had a hard time figuring out how I feel about it. It took a while for me to adjust to how unimpressive everything was. These compositions, with a few exceptions, are super simplistic, feel like they have like 2 or 3 layers to them compared to the usual 200 or 300. Like an experiment to test how minimalistic they can possibly make a project use the least possible amount of sounds while still remaining recognizable as Autechre. In one breath, you would think that this would be more up my usual alley than their other projects, given how completely overboard their last couple of projects have gone, and how I have complained about certain projects of theirs being too out there for my tastes. But, I don't know, I'm no stranger to minimal ambient projects, kinda like these, and the sheer novelty of Autechre making one at all isn't gonna be enough for me all on its own. With a project like this, every element would just have to be nailed. They have to establish some real solid atmosphere, and, you know, I didn't have any expectations that they wouldn't pull it off, but I don't know. With a few exceptions, the whole mix ended up feeling rather flat and muted. Not to mention, the melodies themselves often didn't feel like they were going anywhere, like the tracks didn't feel like they had much progression over time either. Everyone may have been comparing this project to Oversteps because that is definitely the easiest parallel to make in their catalog, but I don't know if that's necessarily a comparison that does sign any favors. Like, the atmosphere on Oversteps was just so much larger in scale and big and imposing. It had this really intense and ghostly presence to it, where Sign just doesn't really have any of that. It's comparatively pretty unthreatening. Mind you, Oversteps also had quite a bit of filler. It was quite easy to mistake tracks for each other, and Sign's 11 tracks do all have their own distinctive identity and don't run together like those on Oversteps do. So that is a plus, but I would still probably say I enjoy Oversteps more. The pacing is better here, but the sound design clicked better for me there, and the standouts just hit way bigger heights. You're not getting anything near the level of a C on C or a Triel on here. Turning that on. Purely on a personal enjoyment level, I'd say the real closest parallel for me in their catalog is Chiastic Slide. That project was a bit of a mixed bag with quite a few pleasant moments that did certainly work quite well for me in their subtlety, but other moments that just dragged and did little to nothing for me. Though still all sounding similar enough that some of the weaker moments could trick me into thinking that I didn't like the better moments as much as I really did. That's more or less the way I feel on this new one as well, and for you people who love Chiastic Slide to bits, I wouldn't get too excited. The two projects obviously have pretty much nothing in common sonically. They just get roughly the same amount for me and on an emotional level. Not sure which one I'd rank higher. They're I don't know. I do still like this one more than Draft. There may be no track on here as great as Surapir or Vproc, but the rest of that project is still pretty motion sickness inducing. This one is at least more approachable for me. It doesn't wear out on me as easily. But yeah, that's about where I stand. It may as well go into individual tracks. These are a little all over the place. I will say this thing starts really strongly. The first track, M4 Lema, was pretty constantly my favorite track in the bunch, the way it starts with all their usual metallic buzzing synths, and then all these warm pads break into the mix like rays of sunshine. There's a pretty subtle groove formed underneath with all the buzzing and clanking, and this is one of the moments where it felt like they really nailed some immersive atmosphere. There's even some cool progression as its various elements ebb and flow over time. It's really nice. This is a really good start. But as good as this opener is, it's not the most indicative look at what this album's all about. I think the second track, F7, does that job a bit better. Very simplistic melodic track made out of what sounds like the same synth tone they used in the intro of their track Perlance from Quarestis. Lots of whirring square wave melodies that may still often feel like they're tumbling over each other in a heap, but there's still a solid foundation of harmony being formed with its progression of bassy fifths. And that's literally all there is to it. Not really any reverb, no percussion, even if there is a pulse, that's it. The sound design of this particular track ends up resonating through several different tracks all over this project, many of which are just simple melodic meanderings like these with similar square wave type synths and flat production. See sch.mefd, Metaz Form 8, GR4, the Red A, Peace in AM, and Arcasd. Mind you, they're not so similar that they can be mistaken for one another, they just build off similar formulas in sound design, and how much said formula works is very much hit and miss. On one hand, you got a track like Metaz Form 8, which is one of the easy best tracks in the bunch. Its metallic organ-like pad drones remind me of the Mathematics track Evening Star, and its plinking Rhodes melodies on top really help give this track that extra bit of emotional power. That one was really solid. I also did think GR4 was pretty good. It's got these like glassy plucks in the background that have a little bit of a deadmau5-ish quality to them, and they're slowly overtaken by these wheezing synth pads that sort of resemble guitar feedback. And it's nice and tight at only about 3 minutes. But a lot of the other tracks in this mold kind of fell flat for me. Like, sch.desk, it may have some nice stormy build-up, but it kind of grows stale and meandery as it goes on. It's placed early enough in the album to not bother me as much, but it is definitely not a standout. And the stretch of the last 3 tracks felt like this album just kind of ran out of steam. Like, the Red A just kind of sounds like sch.desk, but with a lot more of a fuzzy stop-start quality to it, and some kind of neat, filtered bass washes. That one did eventually grow on me a little, but it could really get on the tedious and repetitive side. Peace in AM sounded like a flatter and less compelling companion to Boards of Canada's Everything You Do Is a Balloon, made out of a really similar synth pad progression, which was actually pretty nice given I really love that track, but is still a far cry from hitting the same level as that for me. And the closer, Arcasd. That sounds like if you ran their track Altabiz over with a steamroller. It's made up out of really similar synth tones, but it's dragged out too long and lacking the same sense of subtlety and space that track had. That was kind of a disappointing note to end the project on, honestly. Mind you, there are other tracks that don't just focus on nothing but the usual square wave stuff. SI00, for instance, is a particular standout featuring these bubbly synth plucks going over a progressing thumping kick and later a buzzing bass drone. Really consistently got into that one. And sch.mefd 2. That one sounds like something left over from Xi, I guess. Like the bass drone and jerky glitching beat going up against all the splattering of hollow organ synth licks do create a foreboding sense of menace that I quite enjoyed. That one was nice. But you also got AU14, which I appreciate for how it's the only track on here that sounds like this. And I do like all the several textures of squirty synth licks that come and go in the background. It's one of the more dimensional and interesting cuts here. But it's also a pretty consistent headache. Those constant thwapping kick rhythms and slow plodding beat just make it feel like a boneless companion to C16 Deep Tread from Elsec. It was just not a fun one to get through. But yeah, that's everything on Sign. Certainly there are plenty of moments that do really work for me, but I'd be lying if I said I saw myself coming back to this one much in the future. None of this stuff is an active turn-off for me. Every track did at least have one listen where it might have been a favorite at one point, even if I might change my mind later. But I also wouldn't rank any of these tracks among my favorites that they've ever created. And in the bigger scheme of things, I just can't say that this project really sticks out to me as anything all that special. In the context of Autechre's back catalog, it's certainly noteworthy. They've never made an album this simple and stripped back before, and it doesn't sound quite like anything else they've made. And after dropping gigantic projects like Elsec and NTS on such that ridiculous scale it is actively inconvenient to digest, having a project that is not only just an hour long but also so straightforward in its construction is certainly a welcome change of pace for them. But at the same time, while it's special for them, it's not really special in the grander scheme of electronic music. I could see a particularly talented, obscure Bandcamp artist sending an album like this in to me for a $10 Patreon text post. I'm certainly not about to say this project is half-assed. It's clearly not in their comfort zone and probably took some effort out of them in order to strip things down so much. And I can see this project still clicking for people who really find the emotional core of this project to be really compelling. Like, you could easily make the case that the removal of all the experimental artifice here could end up with a project that really reveals and highlights the humanity at the core of all their music. I'm just not sure if that's the core fundamentals really hit for me. I do appear to be going against the grain by saying it hasn't really stuck with me, and most people seem to be really feeling it, so I can still probably give it my recommendation in case it does work for you, but yeah, I personally just thought it was decent. Has some solid moments I enjoyed, still recognizable as their style, but I just don't see myself hanging on to it long term. I'm overall feeling a 6.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. I'm sure they're going to be very respectful. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.